8 years ago,
Америка – великая держава. Сегодня, наверное, единственная супердержава.
And the world's only superpower.
The most powerful state, headed by President Trump.
the United States of America, a global leader and undoubtedly the only true superpower in the world, or at least that's the story generations have been told. But the truth is that the United States has been declining at a rapid level for years, currently facing a huge debt crisis, a relatively stagnant economy, a housing crisis, and unaffordable healthcare and education. It has traded unity for political polarization and has already lost the upcoming generation's commitment to politics. All of this and more has given countries like China and India the time and momentum they need to take global control.
In the middle of this century, you're going to have three superpowers that are each one of them more powerful than any of the other countries by a long way. You're going to have America, you're going to have China, and you're going to have India.
Unless something changes soon, the US is surely headed for its downfall. So what exactly is causing these issues? Can they be fixed? Or is there no turning back now? This is the future of the American economy, an economy in crisis. The debt-fueled crisis. Yes, the United States is the strongest economy on Earth. However, let's remember that it's a country propped up by debt, not revenues. As of now, the federal debt stands at a whopping $35.46 trillion, which is 123% of the nation's GDP. To put that into perspective, this ratio towers above the debt to GDP levels of countries often associated with financial turmoil, like Pakistan, Argentina, Ecuador, and Colombia, countries that many consider to be in a state of economic emergency. Just 20 years ago, the US external debt was only a third of what it is today. But how did it grow so fast? And isn't borrowing money a common strategy for building economies? Sure, most nations take on debt, but the difference here is that the US is seeing little return on its massive borrowing. For a superpower, that is a fatal flaw. Take a look at the GDP growth rates of the USA over the last 2 decades, and now compare this with the GDP growth rates of China and India. And it's not just the government that is taking on loads of debt. Everyone in the country is doing that. In return, the US has one of the highest household, corporate, and government debt in the world, which altogether is now equal to 335% of the national GDP. But the worst part is that this debt isn't even providing temporary relief anymore. Basic needs, which were never affordable in the US, are getting more and more expensive. Let's look closer into exactly what and why. The affordability crisis. Overall, the United States ranks as the third best country globally for living standards. But a closer look reveals that this ranking has more to do with its strength in entrepreneurship, innovation, and global influence, factors that don't directly improve the lives of most middle-class Americans. For them, life is becoming tougher with each passing year. In fact, Gen Z today has 86% less purchasing power than the baby boomers did in their 20s. This means that if 100 baby boomers could afford basic necessities in their 20s, only 14 members of Gen Z can. While there were some bad and worse periods, there have been only a few months in the last 50 years of US history when inflation was net negative. This indicates that even if it weren't for social media and flashy lifestyles, young Americans would have a difficult life. Inflation covers the increasing cost of most things. However, it skips over one important aspect: housing and rental prices. The US is facing a housing crisis too, and equally, things aren't looking good. In 1975, the average home cost 3.7 times the median household income. By the year 2000, the ratio had increased to 4.6 times, just as the housing bubble began forming. Today, with no bubble in sight, the number has shot to 7.2 times the median income. Rents, meanwhile, have doubled over the last decade, making it nearly impossible for young families to secure stable housing. A roof over one's head, a basic necessity, is becoming a luxury for many Americans. While housing is indeed a necessity, it's not the only necessity that Americans today can't afford. In terms of housing, the US may be better than a few other countries that we discussed earlier, but at least people don't have to worry about medical bills there. The US also has one of the most expensive healthcare systems in the world, where even calling an ambulance costs you more than $2,000. something that is free in many other countries. Medical procedures are equally costly, whereas, for example, an appendectomy performed in the United States will cost an average of $33,000, or around 29,000 euros, compared with only 600 euros in France. To tackle these high prices, most people get insured, which helps them pay for necessary medical procedures that would otherwise be beyond their budgets. Insurers often limit patients to specific hospitals, and in emergencies, those limits can be devastating. Take this couple, for example.
With our hospital systems, and we knew that Drew's insurance was a narrow network, and he's supposed to go to a certain hospital. But in emergency situations, we were told, you just go to the closest hospital because it is life or death.
After being forced to visit the nearest hospital, they were left with a $109,000 bill. The worst part is that while US healthcare may be the most expensive, it isn't even necessarily the best.
This country in total compared to most other developed countries, I think it's pretty clear we do worse.
Education isn't any better. The US has one of the most expensive education systems globally, burying students under mountains of debt before they even start their careers. And while fuel might be cheaper in the US compared to Europe, it doesn't help much when you consider that European countries like Germany and France have efficient public transport systems, something the US lacks entirely. The cost of living in America is spiraling out of control. Housing, healthcare, education, and transport, basic necessities, are slipping further out of reach for everyday Americans. And unfortunately, the worst may be yet to come. The largest barrier: politics. The United States has long been a global symbol for democracy, introducing the concept to much of the modern world. It still ranks high in democratic values, boasting a democracy index of 0.811. Yet, despite this, its political system is increasingly failing to satisfy its citizens. Recent elections tell the story. In 2024, Donald Trump became the first Republican to win the popular vote in over 20 years, a historic achievement. But here's the twist. Many argue Trump didn't win the election. Rather, Kamala Harris lost it. Confused? Let's break it down. Trump secured 76.7 million votes, up 2.5 million from 2020. Yet that's still fewer than the 81.2 million votes that Joe Biden received 4 years ago. Kamala Harris, however, fell short, capturing just 74.2 million votes, losing to Trump by over 2.5 million. This election also marked a worrying trend, a voter turnout that dropped by nearly 1%, something that has only happened once since 1996. This decline reflects growing disillusionment with the US political system. For many, the two-party system no longer inspires hope, leaving them to opt out of the process altogether. So, what's driving this discontent? A significant factor is the economic struggles Americans face, as rising costs seem unaffected by who holds power. But another key driver is political polarization. Politicians and their supporters are growing increasingly hostile, with divisive rhetoric dominating discourse. Take Kamala Harris's response to protests at one of her rallies, or Donald Trump's description of the US as a garbage can, blaming Democrats for the grand welcoming of illegal immigrants and refugees. This growing hostility leaves many young Americans disengaged, frustrated, and in some cases, ready to leave. Young Americans are not only refraining from voting because of an increase in polarized politics, but because of the current situation of living standards in the US, are now leaving. Around 3 million Americans were living outside America in 2020, and the number has only increased since then. The American dream, which was once growing within America, is now dead, and the new American dream is to leave America. The global implications. As the United States continues to face these challenges, the world is taking notice. China, for instance, has been steadily advancing its Belt and Road Initiative, creating a vast network of trade and investment across Asia, Africa, and Europe. This program not only strengthens China's economic ties, but also extends its geopolitical reach. Similarly, India, with its rapid technological growth and attraction of foreign investment, is projected to hold significant global influence by 2030. America's challenges extend to its traditional alliances as well. The US once played a pivotal role in uniting NATO and leading Western diplomacy, but over the past decade, tensions have arisen. Allies have questioned Washington's reliability due to inconsistent foreign policy and isolationist rhetoric. Trade partnerships have also taken a hit, with former allies strengthening ties with emerging powers like China and India. Meanwhile, America's softer power, its ability to influence through culture, education, and ideals, has also been diminished. Surveys show that global trust in the US has eroded, with many perceiving it as a nation in decline rather than one setting the global agenda. A world without strong US leadership may mean a less stable global order, with emerging powers competing for influence in ways that disrupt the balance of power until longer-term solutions and agreements are found. For Americans, this would translate into fewer economic opportunities abroad, weakened alliances, and a loss of the global respect that has defined the nation for generations. The question remains, can the United States rebuild its strength and reclaim its leadership role? Or are we witnessing the end of an era? Before we end this video, let us know what you think. Do you think the US will be able to bounce back? Or will it only get worse from here? Drop your thoughts below. If you remained with us until the end of this video, leave a US flag emoji in the comments. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more of today's economic stories.